Hi, I'm Dee Brooks, and I'm one of the counselors at Restorative Pathways Counseling, and I am here with our newest addition, Lisa, and we're going to talk about parenting stuff. So if you want to introduce yourself.
Yep, so I'm Lisa, and I am a professional counselor, and I am here to just talk about and elaborate on what the pastor was talking about this week in service. So basically, it is a really tough time for parents, right? There's a lot of people at home. So, some students are actually still schooling at home, and there's just more people in a small space. How do we listen to one another? How do we communicate with one another? How do we de-stress, especially right now? I heard pastors say that we have the opportunity to really engage together and to model really effective behaviors. So what Dee and I are hoping to do today is really give you some just basic skills and tips on how to maybe do that.
Okay.
So the first thing that we want to talk about is we're going to use a frame of reference here, the Gottman style. You heard Miranda talk about that in relationships, but they also have some tips for parenting, caregivers, teachers, anyone who interacts with children. So just real quickly, it's important to kind of take a little note of maybe how you typically interact with your children if you have them, or your grandchildren, or what your overall response to children are in general. So these fall into 4 categories. I'm not going to go into it too much, but just to kind of give you an idea, where do you typically land? We all do some of these, but we probably have one typical style. So dismissive parenting, this is really around the emotions, how we handle emotions of young people. Dismissive parenting is this idea that we don't really like to engage around the emotions of another person, but in particular around children. So it's not always just being real quick to be dismissive and asking a child to stop crying or to stop whining or to stop being angry, but it's also to overcompensate. So when a child is feeling particularly sad, we feel it is our job to make them happy immediately, right? So your child wasn't invited to the party, and now you're going to take them to every one of their favorite places today to make them feel better. A disapproving parent is similar to a dismissive parent, but there's a real negative connotation. So it's not only that the child needs to stop crying, but they need to stop crying because being a baby is not acceptable in this household. So there's this real negative connotation, but also maybe for feelings like anger. Anger is not an okay feeling in this house, and everybody knows it. Laissez-faire parenting, that's this idea that go ahead and have a good cry, Dee, and enough time will pass, and then everything's done. So it's not that we deny the emotion, but we don't really do anything with it. We just let the child go off, they cry, and then we move on. And the last one is what we hope to be talking about a little bit here today, and that's emotional coaching. That's where we engage, we label emotions, we talk about them, and Dee's going to elaborate a little bit more on that.
So yeah, going back into the Gottman's emotional coaching elements that they talk about, one of them is to see your children's emotional responses as an opportunity. And that's like the primary thing. Like something's going on, your kid throws himself on the ground and starts crying. Like, what do you do with that? You know, this is an opportunity to like learn more about your child. Mm-hmm. This is an opportunity to teach them what they're feeling. Like, especially like I work a lot with the little kids in counseling. I do a lot of play therapy and stuff. And they can't label how they're feeling a lot of times. And in fact, play therapy pretty much states that the first way we learn to express ourselves is through play. And so, because we don't understand as children all the emotions that are boiling up within us. So, getting a chance to use these emotional outbursts and stuff as learning opportunities for you, for them, for everybody is a really good way to kind of like frame the issue at hand. So, because I know it could be very stressful for parents, right? Like, what have you done when, like, one of your kids, like, throws themselves on the ground or has an outburst?
Well, I'd love to tell you that I have always been the stellar emotional coach, but I have not, because I do have 2 children. And sometimes it doesn't always work out like that. That's a different opportunity. That's a humbling opportunity to apologize and model what it is to completely fail in a moment and ask for grace. But I do see my children's emotional outbursts or emotional breakdowns as an opportunity to teach them about how to label their emotions, but it's also an opportunity as adults to learn how to label our own. Mm-hmm. So I also work with children clear up to adults, right? And there are a lot of adults that we didn't have the opportunities when we were younger Maybe we come from generations where it wasn't really popular to label emotions. So we're learning as adults to do the same thing. So this is a great opportunity for all of us to kind of do a mind shift. It is scientifically proven that we find the most success not from IQ but from emotional intelligence. And emotional intelligence is not like this sweet, sappy kind of thing that's only for certain personalities. It is the ability to have healthy relationships, to lead groups of people, to engage in work that we are called to do, right? So we have to, before we can do any of that, we have to wrap our head around the opportunity that we all have emotions. They are simply things that send us signals. We don't live and die by them, but they do send us information, and we have to learn to regulate them so that we can get in the right frame of mind. So that's really what we're talking about. We're talking about a mindset that says, this is simply an opportunity.
So kind of piggybacking off of what we said there, you know, the next step in that is to become aware of the emotions and to be able to label them. So part of that is, as a parent, understanding your own emotions first and labeling them and understanding not why. Like, that's one of the big things that we've discussed before is, like, people don't know why. Your kids certainly don't know why. You don't always know why you feel a certain way you do. But to be able to say, well, when I get angry, I feel my face getting hot. I feel my heart rate increase. I know that I have an outburst coming, and to be able to recognize all the different symptoms, if you will, of your emotion. And then understanding that maybe it's not anger, maybe you're frustrated, because sometimes they feel similar, but they are different emotions. And to kind of like be able to like label them, right?
Right, and this looks different in different age groups, right? But there are some basics. So if we start with a very basic need, and this might sound really silly and trivial, but I'd like to say let's start at the very bottom of the pyramid. Who has not snapped at a person because they're hungry, thirsty, or tired? Right? I mean, I get angry. I am one of those people. My kids laugh that I have more snacks in my purse for me than for them. That is a true story. I'm one of those, right? Like when I feel very irritable, when I just have a basic need, if I didn't sleep well, if I have a headache. So sometimes our emotions are driven by the things happening with us physically. I do better if I can just take a breath, have something to drink, have a snack. So do our children. So we have to be careful. So do we. Maybe what our children are asking us is very reasonable, but we are not in the place to receive it. And so it's really important that we check in first with our physical stuff. Are we in a place where we don't feel safe, where we feel really stressed out? We're not going to hear their emotion because we're not processing our own, right? So we can start with something as basic as that. How many people have seen a child just throw themselves in the middle of a grocery store? Well, they could have just needed a snack before we got there. Might be a great time to buy a bag of pretzels, right? I mean, something like that.
So in becoming aware of your own emotions, you're going to be able to recognize them and help your child become aware of their emotions. So that's really what like the parenting aspect of this comes down to, is not only are you modeling how to understand your emotions, regulate them for your child, but you're also going to help them understand, like, I understand that I can see that you're crying right now, and I can see that you're really upset, and your little fists are shaking, and, you know, you have a lot going on right now. Let's help you understand, like, you're obviously frustrated or upset, or start labeling emotions, even if they don't necessarily understand what you're saying. Like, you're helping them to start labeling and understanding their own emotions that they're having. So that way, instead of an outburst in the future, it could be, I'm really frustrated right now.
Right, and so as parents, we get really anxious when we see our child starting to move in a direction that we don't want them to. We see a student in the classroom, we see a member on our ball team, we see our grandchild. We can tell that they're getting irritable, agitated, they're about to do a behavior, and then we get anxious because now we realize it's starting to get a little out of our control. It's really important in that moment to recognize they might need our assistance in being able to tell us what's wrong. And it's sometimes a legitimate response when we say, what's wrong? When they say, I don't know. That's really hard as an adult because we want to fix it, right? And if we hear, I don't know, then we feel very, very like, what do I do now? So that's scary for us. We feel out of control. But it's important for all of us to just recognize, okay, Sometimes I don't know really what's going on too. What could we try? What kind of things could we talk through? But it is so important, and it is, again, just really hardcore neurological science that when we can name our emotion, we can tame it. It is proven that if we name and label our emotion, we immediately start to de-escalate. So if you want to read the science on that, you can Google it and see it. But it's basically just a fact. So the more that we can empower people of all ages to be able to label their emotion, the better off they're going to do. Now, it's important too that labeling the emotion, we have to first recognize that one's happening. In younger kids, it's pretty obvious when they're having a tantrum and they just throw themselves on the floor. But in teenagers, that can look a little different, right?
Yeah.
You might just get an eye roll, or someone gets really, really quiet, or the infamous, they put on their headphones and put their head down in their screen. And that can be a real trigger for parents because it just feels dismissive, but they might honestly be having an emotional reaction. So again, it goes back to that mindset where we have to take a deep breath and say, what if this is an opportunity and not my child just shutting me out?
So going off of what we just talked about, when we can label the emotions, we can understand ours, we can start understanding theirs, how do we get our kids talking to us about it? Especially like we talked about teenagers, you know, they are not ones willing to just open up and divulge everything, and, you know, you get the one-word answers like, how's school? Fine, you know, kind of. So how can we, as parents, work on encouraging communication?
So you and I both know we had to learn in school how to be empathetic to everyone in every situation coming in the room, right? That is a skill. I know sometimes that one of the biggest concerns that parents have when they come in to the room and they have real concerns about their teenagers or their children is that their children don't show empathy. And I get it. I can understand why that would be alarming. But it is a skill that has to be taught. People are not always naturally empathetic. So going by that, we need to be able to express empathy to the young people in our life. They hear often from lots of sources. All kids do these days is they want to be on their screens, they want to be on their phones, they want to be on their tablets. They don't care about what we say. They don't listen or respect their elders. They hear these messages a lot. So perhaps we could take a different approach, right? If we can regulate our emotion long enough and try to remember what it was like when we were younger, when our heart was broken at 15, that was the end of the world for us. There was nobody who could tell us that the world, you know, the sun was going to rise the next day and that things were going to be okay and that I was one day going to have this bright future. That's really honestly how heavy that is for them. And sometimes we forget that as we get older. For littles who want to play outside with their friends and they see all the kids walking to the pool and they can't, that's end of the world for them. They don't do time the way that we do time. That feels like you just took my Disney trip because there's a pandemic. I don't even know what that means. Like, why? So it is really important not to tell them to suck it up because the whole world is in a pandemic and everybody is suffering, but to really try to press in and just take a moment and allow them to feel their feeling and say, gosh, it must be really hard to be who you are right now. That sounds really tough.
So empathy is like a very learned skill that, you know, as counselors, we are not just taught it, but we have to practice it, and we're still learning it. And I think I made the comment earlier that, like, by the time you think you've got empathy nailed down, it's time to retire as a counselor. Like, you just don't get it anymore. So, you know, what is one, like, small skill we can kind of communicate to parents to help them to utilize empathy with their kids? And then, you know, one of the things that we're hoping to do, hopefully by the end of October, is we'll be starting up a parenting group, which we can dive more into these details and more into how empathy looks and stuff. But what would you say would be the one important skill they can start utilizing today?
On the negative side, not being dismissive. So we have a real quick way when we're exhausted, we're tired, we have to get to a Zoom meeting, we have to get to work, of just being like, oh my gosh, it's not the end of the world. And we try to fix it immediately. Oh, that broke, here's something else to replace it. Oh, your friend's not calling you, call a different friend. So we try to provide an instant solution, and that's really dismissive of someone's feeling. on a positive side, allowing ourselves to be vulnerable and to maybe sit down and just share, gosh, I'm kind of going through something similar in my work. It's really hard for me to adjust this way. I can appreciate what you're feeling. I don't know what you're feeling, but I can appreciate it, right? Mm-hmm. And so it's taking the time and being a little vulnerable with our kids at whatever age they are and respecting them enough to show, I think you can get it. I think you can get it.
So what about, the last little part of this is like the discipline and boundary setting really is what this comes down to, right? Mm-hmm. And problem solving. What, can parents do to kind of foster the emotional regulation and emotional intelligence that we've been talking about while still having good boundaries and making sure your kid you don't want your kid to run out in traffic. Obviously it's a rule, something, but helping them understand and grow through discipline.
Right, so I'm gonna let you talk specifically about the differences between punishment and discipline, because I think that's really important and that's an area I know you're really skilled in and passionate about. I just wanna say that the way we tie emotional intelligence and parenting all together is that most parenting seminars, skills, things that you Google or look up on Pinterest, they are very focused on discipline. That is the core. What we like about the Gottman Institute's research is that it says before you can ever get to discipline, you have to get a child to be emotionally intelligent and regulated, or it really doesn't matter what discipline strategies you put in place, right? If you ever try to have a conversation with someone who's emotionally dysregulated, you're not going to get very far, because someone's brain is so narrowly focused, they can't hear you. Mm-hmm. So it's really important to do these other steps first, and Gottman's referred to it as emotional coaching. And so that's why we're talking about these steps, and why the group we're gonna start is going to focus on these in addition to very practical discipline steps. It's definitely part of parenting, and it's important. And so discipline looks like boundary setting, yes. It looks like role modeling, yes. There are natural consequences for behaviors. That's a true story. We can't get around that, and it's important to enforce those. So that's all part of what's going to happen. But it's also important to do it in such a way that we are teaching children how to remain emotionally regulated while receiving consequences. They're not going to like the consequences. That's just a fact. But they can respond in an emotionally healthy way and learn to grow from that experience. And the best way to do that is for us to be able to have our own natural consequences and model a healthy response to them. So we're all working on that, right? Yeah. So Dee's going to explain just real quickly a brief difference between punishment and discipline. And then we would invite you to call our office to sign up for the group that we're starting on parenting. It will be based on this type of emotional intelligence and this type of structure from the Gottman Institute. So Dee, can you talk to us about that?
So one of the things I've learned is actually through the PAX tools training that I did, and they do community events occasionally. But there's a difference between punishment and discipline. And sometimes when we think about disciplining a child, you instantly go to punishment, right? Your kid, is texting at the table and you yell at them, you take their phone from them, whatever, however that looks. Or, you think of spanking sometimes, or, timeouts. But there's a difference between punishment and discipline, really. So one of the things punishment teaches is it doesn't really teach teaches really nothing. To help the child behavior in the future. So, a punishment is just that. It's a punishment. The child doesn't really learn much from their behavior in the future. Doesn't help them emotionally regulate or anything like that. Whereas discipline is teaching what is and is not okay. So that's kind of one of the big things. The other one, the focus in punishment is compliance. Do so because I said so. Not the expectations, which is what discipline teaches. I expect you to behave in this way, and I'm going to hold you to this expectation. And when you achieve that, that's going to be awesome, and we're going to celebrate that. But when you don't, there's going to be consequences. Like you talked about, sometimes there's natural, and sometimes there's logical, sometimes there's restorative consequences. There's just different types of consequences that happen. And then punishment includes spanking, hitting, pain, disapproval, isolation, and shame. So this is, you're grounded. This is, why would you do that? Like, or, you know, the parent that's like screaming at the child in the grocery store because they just threw themselves on the floor because they might be hungry, but this is bringing shame and punishment. Whereas discipline is, part of it is catching your kids doing good behaviors. So again, it's, you know, I see that you did this, like, I think, you know, I see that you threw your toy, but I did catch that beforehand. You took a deep breath and tried not to. So we're going to focus on that. You still threw the toy, so we're going to deal with that, but like, good job at trying to stop and take that deep breath. But discipline is also modeling appropriate behaviors. So parents, like, if you throw things when you're mad and then your kid throws things when they're mad, like, that's a modeling behavior. So remembering for yourself, going back to that first point of understanding your emotions, regulating your own emotions, this is where it all stems down from, is how you behave and what you're showing your kids how to act. So maybe taking that time to think of, like, how should I act this way? How do I want my kid to act if this situation were the same? So that's part of it as well. And then it's offering encouragement. Like, yes, you screwed up this time, you threw your toy, but, you know, next time we're going to take a deep breath and we'll work through this together. We'll talk about what emotions that you're feeling. And this is encouraging. This isn't like punishment. It's not yelling at them. It's helping them to develop that self-control and kind of understand why, which actually goes into my next point, that punishment kind of erodes the adult and child relationship. So when you do punishment, you are putting a barrier between you and your child. Whereas discipline, like, improves that relationship, but also helps foster self-control in the child because they understand why, what the expectations are, what I need to do to meet that, and how I can do better next time, which is really important for that kind of building of that emotional intelligence and kind of that regulation, because it's the dysregulation that causes the problem. And so, like, it also builds their confidence because when they do something right, you're recognizing it. And it also builds responsibility because they know what their expectations are and they know how to meet those. So those are kind of like the basics of what the difference is. So kind of being mindful of, is this, what I'm about to do, is this punishment or is this discipline? You know, like, and does it make sense for what has happened as well? Which is more that we can kind of, again, we could dive into this whole aspect for like 2 hours easily. So, but like, again, we are going to be starting up a parenting group. And if you were to call Restorative Pathways to find out more information, our number is 214-6443. And you can get on our list and you'll be the first to know as soon as it starts up. And we will have all this information and so much more for you. This whole thing could take a lot of time to go over everything we did. This is just nuggets for you to help you out. So do you have anything else?
I just want to say, if you are not a parent, but you are a grandparent raising grandchildren, or a grandparent who just spends time with your grandchildren, if you're a coach, if you are a teacher, someone somehow connected to children, these skills are really important, and you are more than welcome to also come and attend our groups. We have individual sessions, we have family sessions. If there's enough folks who have an interest who are maybe caretakers in other capacity, we could certainly consider a group like that. So we are more than welcome to think about how to meet the needs. But overall, our goal is to really help folks build their emotional intelligence so that we can regulate emotions, have healthier relationships, and work better in community that way, so that everybody, especially these young people, can, fulfill the purposes they were designed to fulfill.